It's from Luke chapter 24, and it's 13 to 35. And it's entitled On the Road to Emmaus. And this came to mind because of some nice weather that we've been having. And I was just thinking how the actual path taken through to Jerusalem, from the north down to Jerusalem, would be dusty, sandy, it'd be rocky, it's going through hills, it's going through valleys. It's really quite a feat. Anyway, starting verse 13. Now, that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who is going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It's true. The Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. Amen. Now, that is a favorite text which I enjoy turning to it. And the language is really quite dense and very meaningful if we stop and look at what is actually being said. So I wanted to start then by looking at the text. Now, it's true to say that the world has changed in the last 2,000 years. I would hope that it would. But whenever we're trying to understand a situation, we need some context to better understand how people back then, 2,000 years ago, circulated and moved around. There were boats in the sea and lakes, but basically people just walked. Now, I lived next door to a secondary school, and it's quite amazing how parents want to drive that last inch to the school door, and don't get in my way. You know, I'm important. But quite a different social change in the fact that then people walked. There was no difference. And I wonder if I could have the first slide. Here's a slide of Israel. And you see the north, and you've got Galilee, and down the bottom, well, at the top you've got Galilee and the Sea of Galilee, but it's all really quite confusing because the Sea of Galilee is not a sea. It's a freshwater lake, and it used to supply all of Israel. But today, about 80% or more of the water which is consumed in Israel comes from desalination. So it's seawater that is then has the salt extracted, and that's what supplies Israel with drinking water. Now, what I wanted to, I wonder if I can just get my pointer. Nothing like coming prepared. Right, now we're in business. Where is it? Is that working? Possibly not. Seemingly not. Oh. Well, I have a pointer that's not pointing. It's an interesting start. Anyway, what we're going to be focusing on...
That'll give you a red pointer.
Oh yeah, that's right. Lovely. Sorry, which one?
So if you press that there like that.
Oh yeah, right.
Okay, if we can find it.
Lovely. That's good. I think it's pretty much the same as mine. Now that little... Right, point to the wrong one. Oh dear, life's hard, isn't it? Right. Now, Jesus lived and worked in Galilee, and you know that Galilee is in the north, and you can hopefully see this. The Sea of Galilee is that pocket of water in the north of Israel. But we often read of Jesus meeting with, for example, Martha and Mary. And Martha and Mary were not next door neighbors. Martha and Mary lived in Bethany. And Bethany, oh, I'm getting the hang of this. There's Bethany there. So Bethany is just outside Jerusalem. If you're wanting to think about where are the other places that you hear, well, you often hear about Bethlehem, not so very far. However, look at Capernaum. Capernaum was where Jesus started his ministry, and I'll refer to that. But why am I putting all this in front of you? It's to also make clear one important aspect of Jesus' ministry. You know, you phone up, you need an ambulance, the ambulance comes round eventually, lights flashing. When Martha and Mary asked for Jesus to come, Lazarus is very ill. It's a different story. The only way to get from the north down to the south is walking. So putting on your sandals. So it's a different situation, but it also requires a great deal of strength and courage. And Jesus did not turn anyone away. That's an important thing to remember. So Capernaum, up at the top, that is there. Another interesting thing about the Sea of Galilee, and this is curious, it also is referred to by other names. The other names that it's referred to, such as the Sea of Tiberias, for example, and it takes its name from all these little communities around the Sea of Galilee. So it's difficult sometimes to remember that we're talking about the same place. Now, the thing here is, I was kind of amused in a way. I shouldn't say amused, but in a situation where there's vacancy as a pastor, the usual thing is that an advertisement is placed somewhere, sometimes in magazines, newspapers, and the like. But the situation with Jesus, he's now aged 30. He's eligible to become a rabbi. But what happened here was quite different. There's not a vacancy that you apply for. Jesus had a different hurdle, if you like, and that was that he was eligible to become a rabbi, but the thing is, where's your congregation? Now, he had to go out and walk in the neighborhood and find people who are prepared to follow his leadership. So he's responsible for drawing people together and creating his own congregation. Now, Jesus did attract people from the area, and 5 of his disciples came from Capernaum, including Peter, Andrew, James, John, and Matthew. Now, I was saying Jesus traveled on foot, and I mentioned Martha and Mary. When they sought help for their brother Lazarus, Jesus faced a quandary. Now, remember that Jesus is up north in Capernaum, and they are in Bethany, just there. So that's quite a substantial distance. The quandary that Jesus faced was how to get there before Lazarus died. In fact, it was not possible to do so. It was 85 miles from Capernaum to Bethany, which was close to Jerusalem. Now, a wee bit, I'm not going to give you math tests, but average walking speed might be something like 2.5 miles, somewhere between 2.5 and 4 miles per hour. So a mile, depending on your health, your fitness, and maybe climate as well, and whether it's hilly or whether it's downhill. A mile takes between 15 to 24 minutes. There was no transportation, so there are no fast cars, no ambulances with flashing lights, no trains, no magic bus, no stagecoach. So Jesus simply put on his sandals and headed off to Bethany. And that shows two things: his level of commitment, but also he was prepared to assume what is quite a physical challenge as well. Now, this would take 21 hours of walking, which was typically spread over a few days. But when Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had already died. He had died 4 days ago. He was placed in a tomb. The miracle that Jesus achieved in restoring Lazarus back to life showed the power invested in Jesus by his heavenly Father. Now imagine the scene. Jesus approaching and entering the tomb of Lazarus, who had died days before. The smell of putrefaction would be unmistakable. Lazarus was very clearly dead, but Jesus commanded him to leave the tomb. Imagine the situation where grief turns to overwhelming joy as the dead Lazarus rises and walks. There is nothing in this world which would prepare you for this situation, but this was just one of the miracles which Jesus achieved. Now, in the passage that was read, we have the description of Jesus walking along the road to Emmaus. Now, just for your own purposes, I'll tell you that in the New Testament we have 3 references to Emmaus. But present day, there was a lot of disquiet because people could not identify clearly, well, where is Emmaus? Where is Emmaus where all these people passed through? And then someone realized, oh, Emmaus is actually Al-Motza. Now, getting back to this question of migrants passing through, there's always been that situation, even in biblical times. Al-Motza in Greek means Emmaus. So it's like a light bulb being turned on. Fantastic. So that answers another question. Well, here we have a situation in the text. Jesus walking along, and it's 3 days since his crucifixion. It appears to be quite an ordinary day, but the prevailing mood is rather somber. There's solemnity about the place, so Jesus steps forward to ask, what's happening? Why doesn't Jesus know what has happened here? People respond asking themselves in disbelief, what happened to this man Jesus who carried the hope of so many? That people would be rescued from this immensely sad and forlorn land. They are going over in their own minds again and again all that has happened to better understand what has happened. And they ask him, are you the only one in Jerusalem who hasn't heard what's happened during the last few days? Now, this event has obviously been very widely talked about and shared. The passage goes on to give us some indication of how highly regarded Jesus was before he was murdered on the cross by those at the very top of society. Notice also the reference to how our women have completely confused us. Well, women are not always confused by what men do, or I'll say, I'm sure, but I wouldn't go into that, but it's an interesting issue. However, at that time, women were not regarded as credible witnesses, and so evidence from a woman would typically have to be further corroborated by a man. Yet Jesus did not accept this way of thinking. Think of how Mary Magdalene is the very first person to see the risen Jesus. This is not inserted casually or by accident. Jesus on the road then talks of how his life on earth was exactly as laid out in detail by the prophets. Here he asks, why could you not accept what the prophets were telling you? The tail end of this passage is about Jesus making out to leave them and continue on his way, but they press him to stay and to have supper with them. It is at this point at which Jesus is breaking the bread that they recognize who he really is. Then Jesus disappears. Now, there's another word in the text which is worth noting. It talks about animated talk. So you can imagine a conversation where the people concerned are, their heads filled with excitement. And it's not just, it's still talk. It's not despair. In fact, they say, didn't we feel on fire as he conversed with us? Now, for this pair, their mind is made up. They know what they have to do, and that is to head back immediately to Jerusalem to tell the others and tell them everything that's just happened. Now, you know that it's 7 miles away, but they're totally up for this. The critical point is when they see him break the bread. This was the conclusive proof that identified this man, Jesus, beyond doubt. It's his mannerisms and his ways of doing things that have identified him. And there are probably people in your own family, for example, that you know because of the way they walk, the way they speak, goodness knows what. But there are little ticks, little points of difference which identify us as being individual. Now, I wonder if I could go to the last of the 4 slides. Right. No, sorry, the third one, the one before. That's it. Now, this particular slide is about distances in biblical Israel. And it's interesting because we have Jerusalem. Jerusalem is being seen very much as the administrative center of things in Israel. And it's pointing to the differences, and it's also charting the distance between cities. So, for example, there's Nazareth, 70 miles from Jerusalem. And then we have Bethlehem, which is not far away, it's only 6 miles. Bethany, 2 miles. So if you wanted Babylon, that's 550. But it's interesting because it gives you a perspective on how this fits together like a jigsaw. But the important point to remember is that you need a lot of stamina to undertake many of these trips. Remember that it's dry, it's dusty, there's also parts of the land. They're not just dusty, they're desert. So you've got a range of very difficult conditions to take in mind. So just bear in mind the two words, on fire. And I thought, isn't it amazing how everyone here has heard many sermons over their lifetime, and many of them, well, not exactly as riveting as they could be, perhaps. But on fire is how they describe Jesus talking to them. And I can't help but say, I think that is absolutely wonderful. It's amazing. And wouldn't it be fantastic to have been able to have been either Luke or Cleopas and to have witnessed this? If you could just go to the last slide. Now, this is a painting by Caravaggio. And this is, it's just it's a painting, but I found this quite interesting. Jesus does not look like Jesus, but we have been told many times, no, Jesus will look different from the Jesus that we knew, but this is the Jesus post-resurrection. In the painting to the left with the white skull cap, you've got the innkeeper. Over to the right, we've got Luke, and he's stretching his arms out. He can't believe what is happening before him. And over at the opposite side of the table, we have Cleopas. So, I don't know, we each have different interpretations we can put on this passage. But, you know, for me, it's one passage which starts to come alive once you start to look more closely at what is being said. Now, next on the... Oh yeah, okay. There's something else. And then afterwards, we're going to look at communion. So I'll stop there. Thank you.